the spring of 1815, a young woman named Eliza Fenning climbed the steps of the Old Bailey Courthouse in London, looked the recorder in the eye, and said 4 words that would haunt England for decades: "I am truly innocent." She was 22 years old, small, and described by every person who knew her as kind, cheerful, and hard-working. She had spent her entire life in service, moving from household to household since the age of 14, working long days in smoky kitchens for people who barely knew her name. In January of that year, she had taken a position as cook for the Turner family at number 68 Chancery Lane, a respectable address in the heart of London, and by all accounts, she was happy there. She liked her place, she later told the court. She was comfortable. She had no reason in the world to do what they accused her of doing. On the 21st of March, 1815, Eliza prepared lunch for the Turner household: rump steak, potatoes, and yeast dumplings. Within minutes of sitting down to eat, 3 members of the family were seized with violent stomach pains and vomiting. Roger Gadsden, an apprentice who had eaten a small piece of dumpling in the kitchen against Eliza's advice, became ill too, and Eliza herself, who had eaten a dumpling after finishing her own lunch, collapsed in the kitchen, sick and vomiting alongside the very people she was accused of trying to kill. The doctor was sent for. When Orlibar Turner showed him the remains of the dumpling dish the next morning, the surgeon stirred warm water through the residue and found half a teaspoon of white powder at the bottom. He tested it. It was arsenic. The packet of arsenic that the Turner family kept in an unlocked office drawer, marked clearly with the words "arsenic, deadly poison," was found to be missing. And Eliza Fenning, who had been alone in the kitchen during the preparation of the dumplings, who could read, and who therefore could have identified the poison label, became the only suspect. The case came to trial on the 11th of April, 1815, and what happened inside that courtroom was a masterclass in how justice can be shaped by class, by wealth, and by the assumptions of powerful men about the guilt of a poor young woman. Eliza had no real legal counsel. She had no money for it. Her parents scraped together £5 for her defense. 2 guineas went to an attorney named Mr. Alley, and the rest to a solicitor who drew up the brief. Against her stood the full weight of the Turner family and their network of legal connections in one of London's most powerful professional streets. The prosecution was riddled with conflicts of interest that would be scandalous by any modern standard. The Turner family's personal solicitor served as clerk to the very magistrate who had committed Eliza to trial. The recorder who presided over the case, a man named John Sylvester, was known for his harsh and summary approach to criminal justice, and the evidence against Eliza was entirely circumstantial. No one had seen her add anything to the dumplings, no arsenic was found in her possession, and crucially, she had eaten the dumplings herself and fallen violently ill. 5 witnesses were called to speak to her character. Each one described her as honest, respectable, and of good nature. One critical detail emerged from the testimony that the court chose to dismiss rather than investigate. Charlotte Turner, the daughter-in-law of the household, had recently threatened to dismiss Eliza after finding her in what she described as a compromising situation near one of the male apprentices' rooms, a claim that was vague, unsubstantiated, and which Eliza flatly denied. The court accepted Charlotte Turner's version without question and used it to provide the motive for a crime that nobody had witnessed. The jury deliberated briefly and found Eliza Fenning guilty. The recorder sentenced her to death by hanging. Across London, the public reaction was immediate and furious. Popular opinion was overwhelmingly in her favor. Petitions were circulated. Reformists and liberals took up her cause. Desperate appeals were made to the Prince Regent, the Home Secretary Lord Sidmouth, and the Lord Chancellor Lord Eldon, all of whom refused to intervene. One extraordinary fact emerged during this period of desperate petitioning. Orlibar Turner himself, the head of the household, had become convinced of Eliza's innocence and attempted to sign a petition on her behalf. He was stopped when John Sylvester, the same recorder who had sentenced her, arrived at his home and warned him that if he signed the petition, the Turner family themselves would be investigated for the crime. Orlibar Turner withdrew his support. The execution was set for the 26th of July, 1815. On the morning of her death, Eliza woke at 4 in the morning, washed herself carefully, and gave a lock of her hair to each of the attendants who had been kind to her during her imprisonment. The parting scene with her mother, as one witness recorded, was heartrending. They were separated from each other in a state of dreadful agony. On the scaffold at Newgate Prison, in front of a vast crowd, Eliza Fenning spoke her final words clearly and without trembling. "Before the just and almighty God, and by the faith of the holy sacrament I have taken, I am innocent of the offense with which I am charged." She was hanged alongside 2 other condemned men, one convicted of raping a child, the other of sodomy. At her funeral 5 days later, 10,000 people followed her coffin through the streets of London. 6 girls dressed in white walked alongside the pall. Every window was filled with mourners. The tops of houses were covered with spectators. There was not room inside the church. A mob of over 1,000 people gathered outside the Turner residence, threatening to burn it down. Constables stood watch for days. Charles Dickens believed she was innocent. Samuel Parr believed she was innocent. William Hone, a reformist journalist, published a 240-page investigation of the case that systematically demolished the prosecution's argument and concluded that Eliza Fenning had been hanged to send a message to the servant class, that any servant who threatened the order of a respectable household would be destroyed, whether the evidence supported it or not. And then, years later, came the detail that closed the case forever in the minds of those who had never believed her guilty. A report appeared in the Morning Journal stating that a son of Orlibar Turner had recently died in miserable circumstances in an Ipswich workhouse, and that on his deathbed he had confessed that he had put arsenic into the yeast dumplings to poison his own family. The exact reason he gave was never recorded. His name was Robert Gregson Turner. He had been present at the lunch. He had eaten the dumplings. He had suffered the same symptoms as everyone else, and he had watched Eliza Fenning walk to the gallows for something he had done without saying a word. Eliza Fenning was 22 years old when she died. She had done nothing wrong, and the legal system of one of the most powerful nations on earth had killed her for it.